"I can understand what he's saying," said the 7-year-old autistic girl after the translator left, the young millionaire alone in the $500 million business meeting. "Before we share this unbelievable true story that shocked the world, we want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below." The boardroom fell into stunned silence as the translator stormed out, slamming the mahogany door behind him. The sound echoed through the 37th floor of Morrison Industries, where a desperate $500 million deal hung in the balance. Around the polished conference table sat 12 executives, their faces pale with the realization that their company's salvation had just walked out the door. "This is a disaster," whispered CFO Margaret Chun, her hands trembling as she clutched her portfolio. The Japanese investors across the table exchanged concerned glances, their expressions growing more impatient by the second. Without a translator, the crucial contract negotiations had ground to a halt. 20-8-year-old CEO James Morrison ran his fingers through his dark hair, his blue eyes reflecting the weight of 5,000 jobs hanging in the balance. His family's company, built over 3 generations, was hemorrhaging money. This deal with Yamamoto Corporation was their last chance to avoid bankruptcy. "We need to find another translator immediately," James said, his voice barely controlled. "Mr. Yamamoto, please, if you could give us just 30 minutes. The elderly Japanese businessman shook his head slowly, his weathered hands adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He began speaking in rapid Japanese, his tone suggesting disappointment and finality. Without translation, his words might as well have been whispers in the wind. That's when a small voice cut through the tension like a silver bell. "I can understand what he's saying." Every head in the room turned toward the corner, where Emma Rodriguez sat quietly at a small desk, her 7-year-old frame almost hidden behind stacks of papers. Her mother, Maria, worked as the night cleaning lady and had brought Emma to work due to a babysitter emergency. The little girl's dark curls framed her face as she looked up from her coloring book, her brown eyes bright with intelligence. "Emma." "Honey, not now," Maria whispered urgently from where she'd been emptying trash bins, her face flushed with embarrassment. She'd hoped to finish her work quickly and leave before anyone noticed them. But Emma stood up, her small hands smoothing down her worn yellow dress. "He said the company reminds him of his grandfather's factory. He wants to help, but he's worried about trust." The room erupted in murmurs. James stared at the child, his mind racing. "You understand Japanese?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I watch anime and study languages on the computer at the library. Japanese is beautiful." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "Mr. Yamamoto is saying something else now. He says Americans always rush, but his grandfather taught him that good business needs patience and honor." Margaret Chun leaned forward, her skepticism evident. "This is impossible. A 7-year-old can't possibly—" "Mr. Yamamoto is smiling now," Emma interrupted softly. "He says the young lady has good ears." She looked directly at the Japanese businessman and spoke in clear, careful Japanese. "Yamamoto-san, watashi wa anata no kokoro wo rikai shite imasu." The elderly man's eyes widened in surprise, then crinkled with genuine delight. He responded in Japanese, his voice warm and encouraging. Emma listened intently, her head tilted in concentration, a characteristic gesture that her mother recognized as Emma's way of processing complex information. "He says he's impressed that someone so young shows respect for his language." Emma translated, her voice gaining confidence. "He wants to know if I can help explain what both sides really want." James felt a surge of desperate hope. "Emma, would you be willing to help us? This is very important for a lot of people." The little girl looked around the room, taking in the worried faces of the executives, her mother's anxious expression, and the patient curiosity of the Japanese delegation. Despite her autism making social situations challenging, Emma had always possessed an extraordinary ability to understand what people truly meant beyond their words. "I'll try," she said simply. "But everyone needs to be nice to each other. Good business starts with being kind." As Emma walked toward the conference table, her small sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floor, nobody in that room could have imagined that this quiet, extraordinary child was about to orchestrate the most important business deal in Morrison Industries history. Emma positioned herself between the two groups, her small frame creating an unlikely bridge between corporate titans and foreign investors. She looked up at James with those perceptive brown eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond her years. "Mr. Morrison," she said carefully, "you're scared. Mr. Yamamoto can see that, and it makes him worried too. In Japanese culture, fear isn't good for business partnerships." James felt heat rise in his cheeks, but before he could respond, Emma continued, "Mr. Yamamoto wants to know about your workers. He says in Japan, a company is like a family, and he needs to know you care about your family." The Japanese businessman nodded approvingly as Emma translated James's surprise. She then turned to the delegation and spoke in fluent Japanese, her pronunciation careful but confident. The conversation that followed was unlike anything the executives had ever witnessed. "He's telling me about his grandfather's textile factory," Emma explained, her voice taking on a storytelling quality. "During the war, his grandfather kept all his workers employed, even when there was no money. He says that's real leadership." Margaret Chun grabbed her notepad, frantically scribbling notes. "What does he want to know about our employee retention? Policies?" Emma shook her head gently. "He doesn't want policies. He wants to know about Mr. Morrison's heart." She looked directly at James. "Tell him about Mrs. Patterson in accounting, the one whose husband got sick." James's eyes widened. How could this child know about Helen Patterson? We kept her on full salary during her husband's cancer treatment. She needed the health insurance." As Emma translated, Mr. Yamamoto's expression softened considerably. He spoke at length in Japanese, his hands gesturing expressively. Emma listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions in perfect Japanese syntax. "He says you have a good heart, but he's worried about the debt numbers," Emma translated. "He wants to know if you're hiding anything because his grandfather taught him that secrets poison business relationships." The room fell silent. This was the moment of truth. James had indeed been planning to present the company's financial situation in the most favorable light possible, omitting certain problematic details. "Emma," James said quietly, "tell him that we have some challenges I haven't mentioned. Our quarterly projections are worse than the initial reports showed." As Emma translated this admission, the American executives held their breath. Admitting weakness during crucial negotiations went against every business school principle they'd ever learned. But Mr. Yamamoto's response surprised everyone. He smiled broadly and spoke warmly in Japanese. Emma's face lit up as she translated. He says, "Honesty is the foundation of trust. He appreciates that you told the truth, and now he wants to hear about your real plan to fix things." "Mr. Yamamoto is very wise," Emma added, her voice taking on an adult-like quality that made everyone in the room pause. "He says American businesses often focus on money first, but Japanese businesses focus on relationships first. Money comes after trust." Dr. Sarah Williams, the company's head of human resources, leaned forward. "Emma, how do you know so much about business?" The little girl looked down at her hands, suddenly shy again. "I listen to people, and I read books. At the library, during lunch at school. Business is just people trying to solve problems together." Maria Rodriguez watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. She'd always known Emma was special, But seeing her command this room of powerful adults was both thrilling and terrifying. Mr. Yamamoto spoke again, this time directly to Emma. She listened carefully, then turned to James with a serious expression. He wants to make a different kind of deal. Not just money for shares. He wants to teach you Japanese business methods, and he wants to learn American innovation. He says together, both companies can be stronger. The proposal that emerged over the next hour, facilitated entirely by Emma's translation and cultural interpretation, was revolutionary. Instead of a simple investment, Yamamoto Corporation would provide $500 million in exchange for a partnership that included technology sharing, employee exchanges, and a joint research division. "This is unprecedented," Margaret whispered to James during a brief break. "She's not just translating, she's negotiating." James nodded, watching Emma carefully explain a complex financial concept to Mr. Yamamoto, using simple diagrams she'd drawn on her coloring paper. She understands what both sides need better than any of us do. As the session continued, Emma's unique perspective began to transform the entire dynamic of the negotiation, creating possibilities that neither side had initially imagined. As the afternoon wore on, Emma's remarkable abilities became even more apparent. She didn't just translate words. She translated intentions, emotions, and cultural nuances that escaped even the most seasoned business professionals in the room. "Mr. Yamamoto is concerned about something," Emma, pausing in the middle of translating a technical discussion about manufacturing processes. "He's not saying it directly, but he's worried about American work culture." James frowned. "What do you mean?" Emma looked thoughtful, her small fingers tapping rhythmically on the table, a self-soothing gesture that helped her process complex information. "In Japan, workers stay with companies for their whole careers. He's worried that American workers will leave once they get training from his company." This insight struck at the heart of a concern that hadn't been explicitly discussed. Mr. Yamamoto confirmed Emma's interpretation with a lengthy explanation in Japanese, his expression revealing genuine worry. "He says his grandfather's factory had workers whose families worked there for generations," Emma continued. "He wants to know if Mr. Morrison can promise that kind of loyalty." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Traditional American business practices emphasized flexibility and mobility, concepts that seemed at odds with the Japanese approach to long-term employment. "Emma," James said carefully, "ask him what would make him feel confident about our commitment to our workers." The conversation that followed revealed depths of cultural understanding that impressed everyone present. Emma seamlessly navigated between languages and concepts, explaining American pragmatism to the Japanese delegation, while helping the Morrison team understand the deeper values driving their potential partners. "He wants to visit the factory floor," Emma announced after a particularly animated exchange. "Not for inspection, for introduction. He wants to meet the people who will be working with his company." Margaret Chun checked her watch nervously. "The factory shift ends in 2 hours. We could arrange something for tomorrow." "No," Emma said firmly, with a conviction that surprised everyone. "He wants to meet them while they're working. He says you can't understand a company's spirit from conference rooms." Dr. Williams looked skeptical. "Emma, sweetie, the factory floor isn't really set up for visitors during production hours." But Emma had already begun explaining the situation to Mr. Yamamoto, whose eyes lit up with enthusiasm. His response was immediate and decisive. "He says, in Japan, the factory floor is the heart of the company," Emma translated. "He wants to bow to the workers and introduce himself properly. He says it's disrespectful to make business decisions about people without meeting them first." James felt a strange mixture of anxiety and admiration. This wasn't how he'd planned to conduct the negotiation, but Emma's cultural insights were opening doors he hadn't known existed. "All right," he decided, "let's go to the factory." The procession that made its way to the manufacturing floor was unlike anything Morrison Industries had ever seen. Emma walked between James and Mr. Yamamoto, continuing to translate not just words but emotions and cultural context. When they reached the factory floor, something magical happened. Mr. Yamamoto's formal business demeanor transformed as he met the workers. With Emma's help, he learned names, asked about families, and showed genuine interest in their craftsmanship. "Mrs. Patterson," Emma said, approaching the accounting clerk who'd been mentioned earlier, "Mr. Yamamoto wants to know how your husband is doing." Helen Patterson's eyes filled with tears as Emma translated her response and Mr. Yamamoto's compassionate reply. The elderly businessman spoke softly in Japanese, his words carrying warmth and respect. "He says in Japan, we believe that taking care of sick family members shows the strength of a person's character," Emma translated. "He's honored to meet someone so devoted." Word spread quickly through the factory that the potential investor was personally greeting workers. Production didn't stop, but the atmosphere shifted to one of curious excitement rather than nervous tension. "This is unprecedented," Margaret whispered to Dr. Williams. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of business." Emma overheard and smiled. "Mr. Yamamoto says American businesses forget that companies are made of people, not just numbers. He wants to invest in people, not just profits." As they toured the facility, Emma continued to facilitate conversations that bridged cultural gaps. With remarkable skill, she helped Mr. Yamamoto understand American efficiency while explaining to the workers the Japanese concepts of quality and continuous improvement. "He wants to bring some Japanese supervisors to work alongside American workers," Emma explained during a conversation with the floor managers. "Not to replace anyone, but to share techniques. He says learning goes both ways." The implications of this approach were staggering. Instead of a simple financial investment, the deal was evolving into a comprehensive cultural and technical exchange that could revolutionize both companies. By evening, the conference room had been transformed into an impromptu cultural exchange center. Pizza boxes sat alongside traditional Japanese tea service, and Emma moved between groups with the natural ease of a skilled diplomat. "Mr. Yamamoto wants to share something important," Emma announced, her voice carrying a gravity that made everyone pause. The Japanese businessman reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small, worn wooden box. As he opened it, Emma listened intently to his explanation, her eyes widening with understanding. "This belonged to his grandfather," she translated softly. "It's a seal that was used to sign the very first contract his grandfather ever made." The room fell silent as Mr. Yamamoto placed the ancient seal on the conference table. Emma continued, translating his words, her voice taking on the reverent tone of the original Japanese. "He says his grandfather taught him that a contract is not just paper and ink. It's a promise between families, between generations. He wants to use this seal to sign our agreement, but only if Mr. Morrison understands what it means." James stared at the small wooden object, feeling the weight of history and responsibility. "What does it mean, Emma?" Emma translated the question and listened carefully to the response. "He says it means that both companies promise to take care of each other's workers like family. It means that profit comes second to honor. It means that when problems come, and they will come, both sides will work together to solve them instead of fighting each other." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a business deal. It was a covenant that would bind the two companies together through good times and bad. "There's more," Emma continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He says he's made this offer to 3 other American companies in the past 5 years. All of them said yes to the money, but no to the responsibility. He's hoping we're different." Margaret Chun leaned forward, her analytical mind racing. "What kind of responsibility?" Emma's translation of the answer revealed the true scope of what was being proposed. If Morrison Industries ever faces bankruptcy again, Yamamoto Corporation will provide emergency support. But if Yamamoto Corporation ever faces problems, Morrison Industries must do the same. It's a mutual promise to never let the other fail. Dr. Williams looked stunned. That's not a typical business relationship. No, Emma agreed, her childlike wisdom shining through. It's better. It's how families work. James felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. This went far beyond the original investment proposal. It was a fundamental reimagining of how businesses could operate not as competitors in a zero-sum game, but as partners in mutual success. Emma, he said quietly, tell Mr. Yamamoto that I need to understand something. What happens if one of our companies makes a mistake that costs the other money? The question sparked a lengthy discussion in Japanese, with Emma occasionally asking for clarification. Finally, she turned back to the group. He says mistakes are part of learning. His grandfather's factory made many mistakes, but each one taught them something valuable. He says American companies are too afraid of mistakes, so they don't learn. As much as they could. The conversation continued deep into the evening, with Emma serving as far more than a translator. She became a cultural bridge, helping both sides understand not just what was being proposed, but why it mattered. Mr. Yamamoto wants to know about Mr. Morrison's family, Emma said during a quieter moment. He says business partnerships should include families, not separate them. James talked about his late father, who had built the company from nothing, and his mother, who still attended every board meeting, despite being in her 70s. As Emma translated, Mr. Yamamoto's expression grew thoughtful. He says his own son chose a different path and doesn't want to join the family business, Emma translated. He worries that when he retires, the company will lose its heart. The personal revelation changed the entire dynamic of the negotiation. Suddenly, both men were not just business leaders, but human beings dealing with universal concerns about legacy, family, and the future. Maybe, Emma said softly, your companies can help each other with that too. Maybe Mr. Morrison's children and Mr. Yamamoto's grandchildren can grow up knowing both cultures. The idea was radical, beautiful, and completely unexpected. As the evening progressed, the business deal transformed into something unprecedented, a true partnership that would span generations and cultures. As midnight approached, the conference room bore little resemblance to its morning formality. Charts and graphs covered the walls, but now they were interspersed with Emma's colorful drawings that illustrated complex cultural concepts in simple, powerful ways. Mr. Yamamoto has a proposal, Emma announced, her voice showing no signs of the fatigue that had overcome most of the adults in the room. He wants to do something that's never been done before. The Japanese businessman stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the city lights below. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of a momentous decision. He says he wants to create a new kind of company, Emma translated, her eyes bright with excitement. Not American or Japanese, but something new. A company that takes the best ideas from both cultures. James felt his heart racing. What does that mean, exactly? Emma listened to the extended explanation, occasionally asking clarifying questions. That demonstrated her deep understanding of both languages and cultures. When she finally turned back to the group, her expression was serious. He wants to merge parts of both companies into a new division, Morrison Yamamoto Innovation Center. Half the workers would be American, half Japanese. They would work together on projects that help both companies grow. Margaret Chon nearly dropped her pen. That's unprecedented in international business. He knows, Emma said simply. He says his grandfather always told him that the best opportunities come from doing things that have never been done before. Dr. Williams leaned forward, her mind racing through the implications. What about management? How would decisions be made? Emma's translation of the answer revealed the true audacity of the proposal. Shared leadership, an American manager, and a Japanese manager for every department. They must agree on all major decisions. The room buzzed with whispered conversations as the executives tried to process what they were hearing. This wasn't just an investment or even a partnership. It was a complete reimagining of how international business could work. There's something else, Emma continued, her voice taking on a note of wonder. He wants to create a school, a place where children from both countries can learn together, understanding both cultures from the beginning. Maria Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing, from the corner, stepped forward. Mia, are you sure you're translating correctly? Emma nodded solemnly. He says children are the future of both companies. If they grow up understanding each other, they can solve problems we can't even imagine yet. The vision was breathtaking, in its scope and ambition. Not just a business deal, but a blueprint for a new kind of international cooperation that could serve as a model for companies worldwide. Emma, James said quietly, ask him why he's willing to share so much with us. What does he gain from this? The question prompted the longest discussion of the evening. Mr. Yamamoto spoke at length, his voice carrying emotions that transcended language barriers. Emma listened intently, occasionally wiping away tears as she absorbed the full meaning of his words. He says his grandfather died believing that business could make the world better. Emma translated, her voice thick with emotion. Not just by making money, but by bringing people together, by sharing knowledge, by taking care of each other. She paused, gathering herself before continuing. He says he's 73 years old, and he's spent his whole life looking for a company that shares his grandfather's vision. He thinks Morrison Industries might be that company. The weight of the moment settled over the room like a blessing. This wasn't just about saving Morrison Industries anymore. It was about proving that business could be a force for good in the world. He wants to know if Mr. Morrison is ready to take that responsibility, Emma said softly. Because once you make this promise, there's no going back. James looked around the room at his employees, at Emma and her mother, at the Japanese delegation that had become so much more than potential investors. He thought about his father's dreams, his mother's hopes, and the thousands of families whose futures hung in the balance. Tell him, James said, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt, that Morrison Industries accepts the responsibility and the honor of this partnership. As Emma translated his words, Mr. Yamamoto smiled for the first time that day. A smile that seemed to light up the entire room. The formal signing ceremony began at dawn, with both the American and Japanese teams present in the conference room that had witnessed such an extraordinary transformation. Emma sat at a small table beside the main conference table, her role as cultural interpreter now officially recognized. Mr. Yamamoto wants to begin with a moment of silence, Emma announced, her voice carrying a solemnity that belied her 7 years. He says we should honor his grandfather's memory and Mr. Morrison's father's memory, because they made this moment possible. The room fell silent, and in that quiet space, something sacred seemed to settle over the proceedings. When they raised their heads, the atmosphere had shifted from mere business transaction to something approaching ceremony. He's going to read the agreement in Japanese first, Emma explained. Then Mr. Morrison will read it in English. He says both languages are equally important in this partnership. As Mr. Yamamoto began to read, his voice carried the weight of tradition and hope. Emma's eyes never left his face, and occasionally she would nod or smile at particularly meaningful passages. When he finished, James began the English version, his voice growing stronger with each clause. The agreement was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. It established not just financial terms, but cultural exchange programs, shared research, initiatives, and mutual support provisions that would bind the companies together for generations. "Before we sign," Emma said suddenly, "Mr. Yamamoto wants to give something to Mr. Morrison." The elderly businessman reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small, beautifully carved wooden box. As he opened it, Emma translated his explanation. "This is a piece of wood from the original factory his grandfather built," she said softly. "He's had it carved into a pen holder. He says it should sit on Mr. Morrison's desk as a reminder that good business grows from strong roots." James accepted the gift with trembling hands, understanding that he was receiving something infinitely more valuable than any contract. As he examined the intricate carving, Emma continued translating Mr. Yamamoto's words. "He says the wood is cherry blossom, which blooms beautifully, but only for a short time. He says it reminds us that business success is beautiful, but it must be renewed constantly through hard work and honor." The signing itself was conducted with great ceremony. Mr. Yamamoto used his grandfather's seal first, pressing it carefully into the red wax that had been prepared for this moment. Then James signed with the pen that had been crafted from the yod. Sacred wood. "It's done," Emma said simply, but her smile illuminated the entire room as the documents were formally exchanged. Mr. Yamamoto spoke directly to Emma in Japanese, his words carrying obvious warmth and respect. Emma's response was equally warm, and the two of them bowed to each other with mutual admiration. "What did he say?" James asked, Emma's cheeks flushed with pride. "He said I have the spirit of a true diplomat. He wants to know if I would consider studying in Japan someday to learn more about international business." The offer was stunning in its generosity, but Emma's response was even more remarkable. She looked around the room at all the adults who had become so important to her. Then, back at Mr. Yamamoto. "I told him I would love to learn more about Japan," she said, "but I also want to help other companies learn to talk to each other the way we did today. Maybe I can help more families keep their jobs." The vision of this extraordinary child becoming a bridge between cultures and businesses was both inspiring and humbling. As the celebration continued, Emma moved through the room, her presence somehow making everyone feel more connected to each other and to the historic moment they had just witnessed. "Mr. Yamamoto has one more surprise," Emma announced as the morning sun streamed through the conference room windows. "He wants to establish a scholarship fund for children who show special abilities in languages and cultural understanding. He says today proved that the future of business belongs to people who can help others understand each other." The fund would be named the Emma Rodriguez Cultural Bridge Scholarship, ensuring that other children with extraordinary gifts would have opportunities to develop their abilities and contribute to a more connected world. As the Japanese delegation prepared to leave, Mr. Yamamoto spoke one final time through Emma's translation. "He says this is not the end of our meeting, but the beginning of our friendship. He says when people trust each other completely, anything is possible." The handshakes and bows that followed marked not just the conclusion of a business deal, but the birth of a new model for international cooperation, one that had been made possible by the wisdom and courage of a 7-year-old girl who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. 3 months after the historic signing, Emma Rodriguez found herself in a place she had never imagined, a beautifully appointed office on the 35th floor of Morrison Industries, with her own small desk and a nameplate that read Cultural Ambassador. The transformation in both her life and the company's fortunes had been nothing short of miraculous. "Emma, we need your help again," James Morrison said as he entered her office, his expression mixing excitement with concern. "Mr. Yamamoto is arriving tomorrow with his entire board of directors. And there's been a misunderstanding about the factory integration timeline. Emma looked up from the Japanese language textbooks that now covered her desk, her brown eyes immediately focusing on the problem. At 7 years old, she had become the company's most valuable consultant, helping navigate the complex cultural waters of their new partnership. "What kind of misunderstanding?" she asked, her voice carrying the calm authority that had become her trademark during business discussions. James sat down in the child-sized chair that had been specially placed in Emma's office for such conversations. The Japanese team expected the joint production line to be operational by now, but our engineers say they need another 6 weeks. Mr. Yamamoto's board is questioning whether we're truly committed to the partnership. Emma frowned, her fingers tapping rhythmically on her desk as she processed this information. Mr. Yamamoto doesn't think that way. If his board is worried, it's because someone is giving him bad information. The insight was typically perceptive. Emma had developed an almost supernatural ability to understand the motivations and concerns of the people involved in the cross-cultural business relationship. "Can you call him?" James asked. "Maybe if you explain the situation." "No," Emma interrupted gently. "Calling would make it seem like we're making excuses. In Japanese culture, that shows weakness. We need to show them our progress instead of just talking about it." She stood up and walked to the large window that overlooked the factory floor below. Even from this height, the changes were visible. Japanese and American workers now labored side by side, their different approaches to production creating a synthesis that was already showing remarkable results. "I have an idea," Emma said, turning back to James with a smile that had become familiar to everyone who worked with her. "But you're not going to like it at first." Her proposal was characteristically bold. Instead of a formal boardroom presentation, Emma suggested that Mr. Yamamoto's board should spend their first day working alongside the factory employees, learning firsthand about the challenges and progress of the integration. "Emma, these are senior executives," James protested. "They don't work on factory floors." "Mr. Yamamoto does," Emma replied simply. "He told me that his grandfather worked with his hands until the day he died. He'll understand what we're trying to do." The next morning, Emma stood at the airport arrivals gate, wearing her best dress and holding a sign written in both English and Japanese. When Mr. Yamamoto appeared with his delegation, his face lit up with genuine pleasure at seeing his young friend. The conversation that followed, conducted entirely in Japanese, surprised the other executives. Emma's language skills had advanced dramatically in just 3 months, and her cultural understanding had deepened even further. "Yamamoto-san," Emma said in careful Japanese, "we want to show you something special today. Not in a conference room, but where the real work happens." The elderly businessman's response was immediate and enthusiastic. As Emma translated for the American team, it became clear that Mr. Yamamoto had been hoping for exactly this kind of authentic engagement. "He says boardrooms are for talking, but factories are for understanding," Emma explained to James. "He wants his executives to see what we've built together." The tour that followed was unlike any corporate visit in the company's history. Emma guided the Japanese board members through every aspect of the production process, translating not just words but the pride and enthusiasm of the workers who had embraced the cultural exchange. "Mrs. Patterson, tell them about the efficiency improvements," Emma encouraged as they stopped at the accounting station, where the woman whose husband had been ill was now training a Japanese colleague in American bookkeeping methods. The story that emerged was one of mutual learning and respect. American workers had embraced Japanese concepts of continuous improvement, while Japanese employees had adopted American flexibility and innovation. The result was a production system that exceeded both companies' original expectations. "The board is impressed," Emma whispered to James as they watched the Japanese executives examine the quality control stations were both cultures. Standards had been merged into something superior to either alone. By the end of the day, the concerns about timeline delays had been completely forgotten. Instead, the Japanese board was asking when they could implement similar integration programs at their facilities in Tokyo. The success of the factory integration visit led to an unexpected development. Emma received an official invitation to visit Japan as a guest of Yamamoto Corporation. The proposal came directly from Mr. Yamamoto's board of directors, who wanted to understand how this remarkable child had achieved what seasoned diplomats often failed to accomplish. "I've never been on an airplane," Emma confided to her mother, as they sat in their small apartment, reading the formal invitation that had arrived in both English and Japanese. "But I really want to see where Mr. Yamamoto grew up." Maria Rodriguez looked at the elegant stationery with a mixture of pride and concern. "Mia, this is a wonderful honor, but Japan is so far away." "Mom," Emma said with the gentle patience she'd learned to use when adults worried unnecessarily, "Mr. Yamamoto promised to take care of me like his own granddaughter. And besides, I think there's something important I need to learn there." The trip was scheduled for 2 weeks during Emma's spring break from school. The arrangements made by Yamamoto Corporation were extraordinarily generous, including first-class accommodations for both Emma and her mother, as well as a comprehensive cultural immersion program. "Mr. Yamamoto wants to show you his grandfather's original factory," James explained during one of their planning meetings. "He says it will help you understand the heart of their business philosophy." Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Will I get to meet the workers who still remember his grandfather?" The question revealed Emma's unique focus on the human elements of business relationships. While most corporate visitors were interested in technology and processes, Emma consistently sought to understand the people and stories behind the success. The flight to Tokyo was Emma's first experience with international travel, and she approached it with the same careful observation she brought to everything else. She studied the flight attendants' service protocols, noting the differences between American and Japanese approaches to hospitality. "The Japanese flight attendants bow more," she observed to her mother. "It's not just politeness, it's showing respect for each person as an individual." When they landed at Narita Airport, Mr. Yamamoto was waiting personally, along with his daughter Keiko and grandson Hiroshi, who was close to Emma's age. The reunion was warm and ceremonial, with Emma demonstrating the proper bowing etiquette. She had been studying. "Yamamoto-san," Emma said in fluent Japanese, "thank you for inviting us to your home. I'm honored to learn from your family's wisdom." The elderly businessman's response brought tears to his eyes. "Emma-chan," he replied, using the affectionate honorific, "you honor us with your presence. My grandfather's spirit would be proud to meet you." The first stop on their tour was indeed the original Yamamoto factory, now preserved as a museum and training center. As they walked through the historical exhibits, Emma absorbed every detail with intense concentration. "This is where it all began," Mr. Yamamoto explained through his daughter, who served as translator when the conversations became too complex for Emma's still developing Japanese skills. "My grandfather started with 12 workers and a dream of creating products that would make people's lives better." Emma studied the old photographs and machinery with the focused attention of a scholar. "He kept the same workers for their whole careers," she observed. "That's why the quality was so consistent." The insight impressed even Keiko, who had grown up hearing these stories, but had never considered this particular connection between employee loyalty and product excellence. "You understand our grandfather's vision better than many adults," Keiko told Emma. "He believed that taking care of workers was the secret to taking care of customers." As they toured the modern facility that had grown around the original factory, Emma met third-generation employees whose grandparents had worked alongside Mr. Yamamoto's grandfather. The conversations, conducted in a mixture of Japanese and English, revealed the deep family connections that had sustained the company through decades of change. "They're not just workers," Emma observed to her mother during a quiet moment. "They're part of a story that started before they were born and will continue after they're gone." The profound understanding of continuity and legacy that Emma demonstrated during their Japanese visit would soon prove crucial to solving a crisis that threatened to derail the entire partnership. On their third day in Japan, Emma woke to find Mr. Yamamoto's household in a state of quiet crisis. Hushed conversations in rapid Japanese filled the traditional home where they were staying, and even without understanding every word, Emma could sense the tension in the air. "What's happening?" she asked Keiko during breakfast, her intuitive ability to read emotional undercurrents immediately detecting the problem. Keiko's usual calm demeanor showed cracks of worry. "There's been a development in America," she explained carefully. "Some of Morrison Industries' board members are questioning the partnership." They think the cultural exchange programs are too expensive and slowing down production. Emma's chopsticks paused halfway to her mouth. "Which board members?" The question surprised Keiko with its directness. Emma might be 7 years old, but her involvement in the original negotiations had given her detailed knowledge of Morrison Industries' leadership structure. "Margaret Chun and Dr. Williams are leading the opposition," Keiko admitted. "They've called for a board vote to restructure the agreement." Emma set down her chopsticks and stood up, her small frame somehow conveying determination that filled the room. "We need to call Mr. Morrison right now." The international phone call that followed was unlike any corporate crisis management session in business history. Emma, speaking from a traditional Japanese home at dawn, coordinated a response to a boardroom. Rebellion happening half a world away. "James," she said in English, then switched to Japanese to include Mr. Yamamoto in the conversation. "The board doesn't understand what we've built. They're only looking at short-term costs, not long-term value." The three-way conversation, conducted in multiple languages with Emma serving as both translator and strategic advisor, revealed the depth of the crisis. Margaret Chun had prepared a detailed presentation arguing that the cultural programs were financially irresponsible and that Morrison Industries should focus on pure profit maximization. "She's wrong," Emma said simply, "and I can prove it." Her proposal was characteristically bold. Instead of defending the existing programs, Emma suggested demonstrating their value through a direct comparison. She wanted to organize a productivity challenge between the integrated teams and traditional production methods. "Emma-chan," Mr. Yamamoto said gently, "that could be very risky. If the integrated teams don't perform well." "They will," Emma replied with absolute confidence. "Because they understand something that Ms. Chun doesn't. They're not just working for money anymore. They're working for each other." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Emma orchestrating a response strategy that impressed both experienced businessmen. Her plan involved not just the productivity challenge, but also a comprehensive presentation of the partnership's achievements that would be delivered simultaneously in both countries. "I need to come home early," Emma announced. "The board meeting is in 3 days, and I need to be there." The return flight to America was a whirlwind of preparation. Emma spent the entire journey creating detailed notes, charts, and cultural explanations that would support her defense of the partnership. Her mother watched in amazement as her daughter worked with the focused intensity of a seasoned executive. "Mia," Maria said softly, "you're still just a little girl. You don't have to carry this responsibility." Emma looked up from her papers with eyes that seemed far older than her 7 years. "Mom, Mr. Yamamoto's grandfather spent his whole life building something beautiful. Mr. Morrison's father did the same thing. I won't let other people tear it down because they don't understand." When they landed in New York, James Morrison was waiting at the airport with updates that confirmed Emma's worst fears. The board rebellion had gained momentum, with 3 additional members now supporting Margaret Chon's position. "Emma," James said as they drove toward the city, "I need you to know that even if we lose this vote, what you've accomplished will never be forgotten." Emma's response was firm and unwavering. "We're not going to lose, Mr. Morrison, because tomorrow I'm going to show them something they've never seen before." The confidence in her voice carried a conviction that made James dare to hope that somehow this extraordinary child might once again work a miracle that would save everything they had built together. The boardroom was packed beyond capacity. As Emma entered, carrying a small suitcase and wearing her best blue dress, word of the 7-year-old cultural ambassador's planned defense of the partnership had spread throughout Morrison Industries, and employees from every department had requested permission to observe the historic meeting. Margaret Chun sat at the head of the conference table, her presentation materials arranged with military precision. Charts showing decreased quarterly profits and increased operational costs dominated the displays, painting a picture of financial irresponsibility that seemed damning in its clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret began, her voice carrying the authority of 20 years in corporate finance, "we must face the reality that this Japanese partnership, while culturally interesting, is destroying our bottom line." Emma listened quietly from her small chair at the side of the room, her brown eyes taking in every detail of Margaret's presentation. She had learned from Mr. Yamamoto that wisdom often came from understanding your opponent's perspective before presenting your own. "The cultural exchange programs alone have cost us $2.3 million in the past 3 months. Margaret continued, clicking through slides that showed mounting expenses. "Meanwhile, production efficiency has decreased by 12% as our workers adapt to unfamiliar Japanese methods." A murmur of concern rippled through the room. The numbers were stark and seemingly irrefutable. Dr. Williams nodded approvingly as Margaret built her case for abandoning the cultural aspects of the partnership while maintaining only the financial investment. "Furthermore," Margaret said, reaching her crescendo, "we are now paying to educate our workers in language and cultural skills that have no measurable impact on productivity. This is a corporation, not a cultural center." When Margaret finished her presentation, the room fell silent. Board members exchanged glances that suggested the vote might be even more decisive than expected. Then Emma stood up. "May I respond?" she asked, her clear voice cutting through the tension. Margaret's expression showed barely concealed irritation. "Emma, dear, this is a business meeting about complex financial matters." "I understand," Emma interrupted gently. "That's why I brought some numbers of my own." She opened her small suitcase and withdrew a stack of papers that surprised everyone with their professional appearance. Emma had spent the flight from Japan creating her own analysis with help from Mr. Yamamoto's financial team, who had provided data via email. "Miss Chun is right about the costs," Emma began, her voice carrying a confidence that commanded attention. "The cultural programs did cost $2.3 million. But she forgot to mention what we gained." Emma moved to the presentation screen with the natural ease of someone who had been facilitating business meetings for months. Her first slide showed production quality metrics that told a very different story than Margaret's cost analysis. "Defect rates are down 34% since we started the integration program," Emma explained, her small finger pointing to the relevant data. Customer satisfaction scores have increased by 28%, and return orders have decreased by 41%. The room stirred with surprise. These metrics had been buried in Margaret's focus on immediate costs, but their long-term implications were staggering. But that's not the most important part, Emma continued, advancing to her next slide. Ms. Chun, do you know why Mrs. Patterson has been staying late every evening for the past month? Margaret looked confused by the question. I assume she's completing her assigned duties. She's been teaching advanced bookkeeping to Tanaka-san from the Tokyo office, Emma explained. Not because anyone told her to, but because she wants him to succeed. And do you know what Tanaka-san did last week? Emma clicked to a photograph that showed the Japanese accountant working alongside Helen Patterson, both of them smiling as they reviewed financial reports together. He identified a billing error that would have cost us $180,000, Emma said simply. He found it because Mrs. Patterson taught him to look for the kinds of mistakes that American companies sometimes make. The cultural exchange saved us more money in 1 week than it cost in 3 months. The impact of this revelation was immediate and powerful. Board members who had been nodding along with Margaret's presentation now leaned forward with renewed interest. There's more, Emma continued, her presentation gaining momentum. The Japanese workers have taught us about preventive maintenance. That's extending equipment life by an average of 3 years. The American workers have taught them about rapid prototyping that's cut development time by 40%. These aren't cultural curiosities, Miss Chun. They're business advantages that no money can buy. Margaret's confident expression had given way to something approaching concern as Emma systematically dismantled her argument with facts and figures that painted the partnership in an entirely different light. Emma's presentation continued with a slide that made everyone in the room gasp. It was a profit projection chart that showed Morrison Industries' trajectory with and without the cultural integration programs, and the difference was staggering. Mr. Yamamoto's team in Tokyo ran these numbers, Emma explained, her small voice carrying the weight of serious financial analysis. If we continue the cultural exchange programs, our projected profits for next year will be $47 million higher than if we abandon them. Margaret Chun stood up abruptly, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. This is ridiculous. We're taking business advice from a child who doesn't understand basic economics, Ms. Chun. Emma interrupted, her voice remaining calm despite the adult's outburst. You're right that I'm just a child. But I understand something that your numbers don't show. She clicked to her final slide, which showed a simple photograph of the factory floor taken that morning. American and Japanese workers stood together around a piece of machinery. There, faces animated with excitement as they discussed a solution to a technical problem. These people don't just work together anymore, Emma said softly. They care about each other. When Kobayashi-san's daughter was in the hospital last month, 12 American workers donated their vacation days so he could stay with her. When Tom Mitchell's wife lost her job, the Japanese team helped him find her a position at their supplier company. The room had fallen completely silent, captivated by the emotional truth behind Emma's business case. You can't put that on a spreadsheet, Ms. Chun, Emma continued, but you can measure its results. Workers who care about each other work harder, smarter, and longer. They share ideas instead of hoarding them. They solve problems together instead of blaming each other. Dr. Williams, who had been one of Margaret's strongest supporters, raised her hand tentatively. "Emma, how do we know this emotional connection will translate to sustained business results?" Emma smiled, recognizing a genuine question rather than an attack. "Because Mr. Yamamoto's grandfather proved it works. His company has been profitable for 73 years, through wars, recessions, and technological changes that destroyed their competitors. The secret wasn't better machines or smarter strategies. It was treating workers like family." She paused, looking around the room at faces that now showed deep consideration rather than skepticism. "Morrison Industries was failing because we forgot that lesson," Emma said, her voice carrying a wisdom that seemed impossible from someone so young. "We treated workers like expenses instead of assets. We competed instead of cooperated. The Japanese partnership didn't just give us money. It reminded us how to build something that lasts." Board member Robert Hayes, who had remained neutral throughout the debate, leaned forward. "Emma, what you're describing sounds idealistic. How do we maintain this culture as we grow larger?" "That's the beautiful part," Emma replied, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "Culture spreads naturally when it's real. The workers who learn from our Japanese partners are already teaching new employees. The management techniques we've adopted are being copied by other companies who see our results." She clicked to a supplementary slide that showed inquiries Morrison Industries had received from other corporations interested in similar cultural exchange programs. 6 companies have asked us to help them create their own international partnerships. Emma explained, "We could start a consulting division that helps other businesses learn what we've learned. Instead of the cultural programs being a cost center, they could become a profit center." The suggestion was revolutionary. Emma had identified a way to transform Morrison Industries from a traditional manufacturer into a leader in cross-cultural business innovation, potentially creating an entirely new revenue stream. Margaret Chun sat back down, her opposition clearly wavering as the financial implications of Emma's proposal became clear. The room buzzed with whispered conversations as board members began to grasp the full scope of what the 7-year-old consultant had outlined. "There's one more thing," Emma said, her voice becoming more personal. "Mr. Yamamoto told me something in Japan that I think you need to hear." She spoke directly to Margaret, her tone gentle but firm. "He said American businesses are very good at making money quickly, but Japanese businesses are better at making money forever. He invested in Morrison Industries because he thought we could learn to do both." The simple statement captured the essence of the choice facing the company: short-term cost savings versus long-term sustainable success, built on human relationships and cultural understanding. The vote that followed Emma's presentation was unanimous. Even Margaret Chun, who had led the opposition, cast her ballot in favor of continuing and expanding the cultural exchange programs. The transformation in the boardroom was complete, but Emma knew the real work was just beginning. "Mr. Morrison," she said as the other board members filed out, their conversations animated with new possibilities, "we need to call Mr. Yamamoto. He's been waiting for news, and I promised to tell him how it went." The phone call to Tokyo took place in the conference room, where Emma had first demonstrated her remarkable abilities 6 months earlier. As she spoke to Mr. Yamamoto in fluent Japanese, her voice carried a joy and relief that needed no translation. "Yamamoto-san," she said, "the board voted to expand our partnership. They want to create the consulting division and help other companies learn what we've learned together." The elderly businessman's response was immediate and emotional. Through the phone's speaker, everyone in the room could hear the happiness in his voice as he replied in Japanese. "He says his grandfather would be proud," Emma translated, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He says we've proven that business can bring people together instead of driving them apart." James Morrison felt a profound sense of gratitude as he watched. This extraordinary child who had saved his company not once, but twice. Emma, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. Emma wiped her eyes and smiled with the pure happiness of a 7-year-old who had just accomplished something wonderful. You don't need to thank me, Mr. Morrison. You gave me a chance to help people, and that's the best gift anyone could ask for. The conversation with Mr. Yamamoto continued for another hour, planning the next phase of their partnership. The consulting division would be called Cultural Bridge International, with Emma serving as its youngest advisor and primary case study. There's something else Mr. Yamamoto wants to discuss, Emma said, her expression becoming more serious. He's talked to business leaders in 6 other countries who want to learn about our model. He thinks we could help create a whole network of companies that work together across cultures. The vision was breathtaking in its scope. Instead of isolated businesses competing against each other, Emma and Mr. Yamamoto were proposing a collaborative network that would share knowledge, resources, and cultural understanding across international boundaries. It would be like a family of companies, Emma explained, her eyes bright with possibility. Each one teaching the others, each one helping when problems arise, each one committed to taking care of workers and communities. Dr. Williams, who had stayed after the meeting to hear the call with Mr. Yamamoto, shook her head in amazement. Emma, you're describing a complete revolution in how international business could work. Not a revolution, Emma corrected gently. Just remembering something that people forgot. Business works better when everybody wins. As the call ended and the conference room began to empty, Emma gathered her papers with the careful attention of someone who took her responsibilities seriously. Maria Rodriguez watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and wonder, still adjusting to the reality that her 7-year-old had become a figure of international business importance. Mia, Maria said softly, are you ready to go home? It's been a very long day. Emma nodded, but paused at the conference room door to look back at the table where so much history had been made. Mom, do you think other kids could learn to do what I do? Help companies understand each other? The question revealed Emma's deepest hope, that her unique abilities could be shared and multiplied, creating a generation of young people who could bridge cultural divides and build a more cooperative world. I think, Maria replied, that you're going to spend your life teaching them how. As they left Morrison Industries that evening, the setting sun cast long shadows across the factory floor where American and Japanese workers continued their collaboration, unaware that a 7-year-old girl had just secured not only their jobs, but their place in a new model of business that would soon spread around the world. Emma Rodriguez had started as a janitor's daughter who happened to understand Japanese. She had become something far more important, proof that wisdom, compassion, and cultural understanding could transform not just individual companies, but the entire way